on the Daily Drive. Property Fast Track with Charles Tarbey. Thanks to Century 21. Smarter, bolder, faster. Go to century21.com.au.
Yes,
Now,
Nick Bennett,
Charles,
Kayley Harris with you.
Alenko family is selling up and moving away, but they're so attached to their bright pink bathroom that they're offering, listen to this, $25,000 to the new owner if they preserve it. Now, the bright pink bathroom with a blue bathtub and mosaic floor, it was very typical of, the California bungalow from the 60s.
Beautiful.
And the family loves it. So even though they're selling, they've $25,000 is the estimated cost of upgrading the bathroom. And what they want to do is come back in 5 years' time. If the new buyers have left it alone, they'll give them $25,000 cash. Have you ever heard of something like that before?
I have never heard of anything like that before.
Never in your 45 years of trading real estate.
Never heard of somebody waiting. I don't know what it is. Must be something special. Maybe their firstborn was born in the bath. You never know.
Could have been. It could have been a water birth at home.
Could have been a natural birth. So
well, that's a reason itself to change it. Someone's given birth in it. God.
It's a classic.
Well, it is. For $25,000, I guess I could wait. That's $5,000 a year. It's $100 a week, roughly. I think I could wait for $100 a week.
But seriously,
provided they put the $25,000 in the bank today, because I'd like the interest on it as well.
You're always thinking you want the compound interest, Charles. So that's a fair request. But we all would have seen these bathrooms.
Do you get many clauses like that from people buying homes where they say we don't want this changed or whatever? And where do you stand with that? Are you able to sort of enforce that or not?
Look, it's pretty hard to enforce, and like everything looks good on paper, but then it has to go to court, and that's where it all changes. So everything from a practical perspective seems to work, but gee, I've seen so many disasters when people put too many conditions on selling a property or buying one, for that matter.
It must be.
It's got to be something special. I really wish I could find out what it is that's so special. But we might have to ring up the real estate practitioner and find out on that one.
It must be hard though if you've just renovated a bathroom or a kitchen and you've put it in, then for whatever reason you've got to sell, and people come in and go, the first thing we're going to do is get rid of that kitchen. It's
funny because I remember when I bought the home I live in, which I tell people I bought that 30 plus years ago, and it was built by a gentleman for his family. He had it all mapped out, beautiful home, sandstone, double brick in Glenbrook, where when it was a long, long way away from everything, and it was local sandstone. And I used to run past the house and I always admired it. And I remember when I did buy the property, I gave him a key just in case he needed something after I settled, but the first thing I did was run in and rip down all the velvet wallpaper that was in the hallway and stuff. I didn't even think about it, but it was only afterwards when I realised that he'd come and visited and left something there that he must have felt really sad about that change, because that would have been part of his overall family, and I feel bad about that.
No more 70s nightclub look.
Well, it's back.
It's back,
really?
is it?
Velvet wallpaper's back?
It's back. And not only that, going back, I think I was a real leader in this area. Because when I bought my first home back in the 70s, I put shag pile carpet like any, good new Australian boy would do.
Yeah.
And I painted the wallpaper on. You could paint it with a roller.
Right.
Yeah. And so I did very well out of that house. And I hear that painted wallpaper is making a comeback as well. Not sure about the shag pile.
Where would you even buy wallpaper these days? I mean, there used to be wallpaper shops where they'd sold nothing but wallpaper.
Get it online now. It's quite popular.
Bringing back some terrible memories lately.
But a fascinating story, from news.com.au. So that just to set, look, I think we need to explain this, right? So the couple have sold the house.
Yep.
And they've said you can't change the bathroom. And as an incentive for that, if you don't change the bathroom within 5 years, we're going to give you $25,000. They must have more money than poke a stick at.
That's extraordinary. But anyway, look, nonetheless, it's a good thing. It'd be interesting to see. 5 years' time, let's map it out.
Yeah, right. We'll put that in the iCal.
Yep, we'll put it in the, if you could see, is there any way you can put it in the pensioners pack for me by then? I think it might be at the pensioners pack for me to read about that.
The Bank of Mum and Dad. Turns out the Bank of Mum and Dad have become one of the biggest lenders in Australia, giving out loans with an average size of more than $88,000 and having at least $16 billion in outstanding loans. Financial experts are urging parents to understand the risk of loaning their children money and to think about other ways to help them fund their property purchase. Do you see a lot of this, Charles?
Look, we used to see a lot of it, a significant amount of it occurring with mum and dad helping out the children. But then the GFC came along, and a lot of people got caught with that. And a lot of banks found themselves putting parents who had really nothing to do with it at risk with their mortgages because some of the children defaulted. And the banks started to apply more if you like, policy to the way in which they lend now, based on parents' equity. There's still got to be the affordability issue, which has to be resolved nowadays. It's not just about having equity. Gone are the days where if you've got equity, you can borrow what you like. There has to be an ability to repay, and that has to be demonstrated. And because a lot of parents got burnt, I think that would have been a lot worse, Kayley, if the banks hadn't changed policy a few years back.
All right, so $88,000, just a figure I'm plucking out of that story, says to me that in a lot of cases, parents are loaning their children maybe the deposit.
Yeah, quite possibly the deposit. And again, this goes back, if you go back into the 70s and 80s where people were borrowing their deposit. And that used to happen a lot. And you talk about 100% finance, you talk about what happened in the US and how that market collapsed because of overlending. Well, it wasn't uncommon for people just to come along and say, I've got a deposit. And then you'd find out later on. So the banks started to implement a policy of savings. They wanted to see a pattern of savings. And that sort of changed that a little bit. So I'd say lending the deposit's great, but if the parents are going out and borrowing that money, then they have to explain why they're borrowing it. And if they don't explain why they're borrowing it, then that puts them in a vulnerable position.
It's pretty easy though. Like I take your point about equity. It's not just enough anymore. But if you've got a really good track record with the bank, and let's say you're in your 40s into your 50s, and you've been with that bank for a long time, you got a mortgage on your home which is fairly small, or and you say something like, "Well, I just want to borrow some money for some home improvements." You don't have to reveal all of what you wish to do with the cash.
No, you don't. But if you can change your mind with the cash, if you have the money ready for a renter, and the kids say, "Hey, we found a house," well, okay, well, you're probably going to give it to them. But if you're aware of it and you don't make that disclosure, I think that could put you in a bad position.
Yeah, it's interesting. 13 12 83 tonight. Charles Tarbey's here taking your calls. If you've got any questions about real estate, maybe you want to get into it or get out of it, or maybe dive into commercial real estate. Mate of mine's poking around commercial right now. He's about 50. He's turning 50 this year and said, I wished I had got into commercial a long time ago.
It's a very rational process, commercial real estate. It's not like residential. Residential is very emotional. You spend more time with other people's families than you spend with your own in residential. But commercial is black and white. It's that much per square metre. This is how it works, and off you go. And it's pretty hard to get emotional about a shop that's just four walls with nothing in it.
Or a warehouse.
Or a warehouse. It's pretty hard to get very emotional and excited about it. So it is very much a rational versus emotional type.
Are there some
of
do's and
businesses.
don'ts with buying commercial property?
Absolutely. I've purchased commercial property in the capital cities where I've based my headquarters because I'm the tenant. Now, I see so many people, and commercial is very, very good. You can get a fantastic yield, and sometimes you'll get no growth for a while, then you get massive growth, especially with strata. But then all of a sudden, if you are the landlord and you've got to put a tenant in, and you've got to offer incentives, and you've got to discount the going rate, and then all of a sudden that tenant has a problem, and now you've got to find somebody else. It can take 6 months to 12 months to find a tenant. Yeah. And if you're not set up for it, you can be in a lot of trouble.
Okay, because you've still got to service that debt.
Yeah. And usually it's going to be a lot larger than a residential property, which you could rent out or sell very quickly in comparison to a commercial property.
Just going to put you on the spot here, now that we are talking commercial. Yeah, what's new? So are you noticing, because a lot of people are saying, bricks and mortar is not so popular anymore. Businesses can be done online, and there's some truth to that. Are you seeing that claim impact on commercial property investment levels?
In what way? I'm sorry.
Well, are people less interested in getting into?
I'm very sorry.
That's right.
Yes.
Commercial investment now, because there's a thought that you don't need so much of that. You can do a whole lot online.
That's correct. There's a lot of. If you look at Parramatta Road, if you remember what Parramatta Road was like, it was the place.
Yeah.
And you look at it now, and there's all of these empty shops. You can't stop there. There's nowhere to pull up nearby. People are shopping online more, and so those sorts of premises are under a lot of threat. You can go into plenty of suburbs, and you'll find a vacant shop. In some areas, I remember in High Street, Penrith, where I was, you could not find a vacant shop. And nowadays, because of the plaza and of course people moving in that direction and shopping online, a lot of these premises that used to be blue chip investments, I used to look at them and go, wow, I wish I could own something like that. And now you look at it, and they lose a tenant. It's a struggle to get a new tenant there. Whereas before, it was a walk-up start. Walk-up start. There was a survey out that said 83% of real estate agents believe that you don't need a shop front. And I got a call from them at the publication that said, "Would you like to comment?" I said, "Will you publish what I say?" exactly. And I said, yes. I said, tell the 83% of agents to hurry up and go upstairs so we can stay downstairs with the community. And I really do think that there are certain industries that need to be there with the community. If you put yourself upstairs in certain locations, I think you're saying, especially if you have competitors who are downstairs, you're saying to the community, well, look, we're a little bit more elitist. If you want us, you can. And I think that runs through. And when the agents were starting having a go at me about the internet and so on, I said, well, if you really believe it, take all your for sale signs down too, because the majority of people aren't looking to buy and sell. And so they're not online. If you put up a for sale sign, though, somebody lives in that street and they go, I wonder what that property's worth. Oh, maybe my family might like to live here. But if you didn't have that sign up,
you'd never know.
You'd never know. And these people are not going online searching. So I think there's very much a community involvement in our industry still. And so shop fronts remain pretty important in some parts.
Now, CharlesFinder.com.au survey of economists suggests rates won't rise until late 2018 at the earliest. Apparently, 33 industry experts surveyed by the company agreed the cash rate would remain on hold when the RBA announces tomorrow, with many believing the status quo will be maintained. What's your feeling about it?
Yeah, it's all about the economy, not about the industry, the real estate industry. And this is part of the issue. A lot of the people will go, when they go and look at the rates and reviewing the rates, it's generally related to the economy. And when they did reduce the rates a few years back, in my view, it had a very negative impact on the real estate market because it sent it into a bit of a flurry again. And this is where I think the issue of affordability kicked in. When they reduced the interest rates and everybody thought it would work for them, it worked against people because all of a sudden there were more buyers out there, the prices were going crazy, and then people were finding themselves in a position where they couldn't buy a property. So I'd say the rates are going to stay on hold because the economy needs them to stay on hold.
All right, we'll find out tomorrow when the RBA's announcement comes out. Property Fast Track tonight. Charles Tarbey's here. 13 12 83 is the number. In a moment, Tim Lawless is here. We'll check out the latest house price report. There are some great advantages in being the world's largest real estate company. For a start, your Century 21 local office uses the best technology and knowledge base in the world, combined with the fact that each office is independently owned and operated. Your local Century 21 agent knows your city, your suburb, your town and your street. It also means Century 21 agents can offer a huge range of resources and experience, including information from over 300 offices around the country. It's no surprise Century 21 is the fastest growing real estate brand in Australia. Buying, selling or looking for a new home to rent? Contact your local Century 21 office and find out why they really are smarter, bolder and faster. Visit century21.com.au.
Now, the peak of the property market was called by a handful of experts earlier in the year, and the latest report from CoreLogic suggests they might have been right. The rate of growth has peaked and values of homes in Sydney could fall by as much as 10% if the trend continues. Growth is flat nationally, except in Hobart, which has a spring in its step. A lot to chat about tonight, and we're joined by Tim Lawless, the Director of Research at CoreLogic. G'day, Tim.
G'day, Kayley. G'day, Nick Charles.
G'day, Tim. You know what? They might be getting right now, but they weren't right when they called it all those months ago, were they?
Well, you never know, mate. In retrospect, it's easy, isn't it? On our data,
it surely is.
We did see the market peak back in sort of November, December last year. Is technically when we moved through a peak rate of growth, but we're not seeing values tracking backwards just yet.
No. And I think that's what they called. Interesting thing is I saw an article, or I watched news the other night, and they called the market in Australia that it's gone backwards because of the auction clearance rates. It's the first negative report I've seen on the news for a long time, and I was really happy to hear about it. I was really happy to watch that.
It's
but even auction clearance rates, they're still tracking generally around about the high 60s in Sydney, low 70% range in Melbourne, which is still a pretty healthy rate of clearance. Certainly not as high as what it was, say, a year ago, around the 80% mark, but just another sign that there's a bit of heat that's come out of the market.
So, Tim, tell us just how flat was growth in August?
Well, it depends on which region you're looking at, and we're publishing national series now, and across the country, nationally, across every property, it was an absolute donut. We didn't see any growth in the housing market. There was 0% change in August. If you look at Sydney, exactly the same, 0% change. But Melbourne's been very much resilient to a slowdown. We saw values rise by 0.5% over the month. Most other cities we're seeing values relatively sedate, still seeing some declines in Perth and Darwin. But markets like Hobart, markets like Canberra, to a lesser extent Brisbane, have seen some growth and a bit of momentum building up in the southernmost capital, Hobart, which is now the strongest performing capital city over the past 12 months.
Yeah, we learnt the last hour too they have free ambulance services and a 0.6% rise in real estate, so not a bad place to go to right now.
Well, there you go, and they've got really high rental yields as well.
Is that right? So there's obviously a big demand for housing stock there.
Yeah, absolutely. There hasn't been much construction happening across Tasmania, so there is a low level of supply, but migration rates are really picking up now. The economy has shown some improvement, so jobs growth is picking up. But I think a big part of what's fueling the Tasmanian market is a lot of equities being unlocked out of the strong growth markets, out of Sydney and Melbourne, and we're seeing a lot of this capital flying down to the lifestyle markets. I think broadly you classify Tassie as a bit of a lifestyle market. It's very affordable, and a lot of people are using their equity to buy their holiday homes or buy their retirement locations into these sort of markets. You could probably throw the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast, Noosa, Byron, those sort of markets into the same category. We are seeing a lot more activity of these lifestyle buyers.
These would be investors primarily, not first home buyers, I guess?
Yeah, you wouldn't see many first home buyers in a lot of these lifestyle markets. Typically, they're people who are leveraging the equity of their property, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, and they're positioning themselves for either a holiday home, a weekender, or a place where they're going to be putting their feet up when they decide to move on in their employment and put their feet up a little bit more.
So across the year, Hobart's smashing it, 13.6% rise, Sydney at 13, Melbourne at 12.7, and Brisbane down at 3%. Perth in at minus 2.8%. So clearly Hobart, doing very, very well consistently.
Yeah, very different performance across all the capitals, but this is the strongest performance in Hobart since 2004. So this marketplace has gone through quite a lull. Values haven't moved very much at all up until about 12 months ago. So they're really starting to rocket higher. But of course, Sydney and Melbourne, we saw growth rates in Sydney peaking out at nearly 20% per annum a bit more than a year ago. So now that the value growth is down to 13% per annum, and over the past quarter, it's only 0.3%, it's pretty clear that some heat's come out of this market.
Tim, I picked Melbourne and Canberra for the last year as the two areas for growth, mainly because I felt Melbourne hadn't received the capital gain it should have, and also because Canberra, because of its security and tenure, because by work, I guess people get work and they know they're secure with their work. So those are the two areas, and they have done very, very well. Are you seeing those two marketplaces starting to slow down?
Well, Melbourne, I'll talk about them different because they are very different markets. So Melbourne, it is slowing down, but very slowly. So we saw Melbourne, it hasn't returned the same sort of enormous capital gains that Sydney has, but it's still been a very strong market. So Melbourne's very much more resilient to a slowdown. We saw the peak rate of growth at around about 14 or 15% per annum. That's now slowed down to just under 13%, so hardly been dented. Still seeing a pretty decent rate of quarterly return as well. Being fueled by really strong jobs growth, really strong migration rates from both overseas and from interstate, and it doesn't have the same sort of affordability constraints as what a Sydney does. Prices generally across detached housing are about $270,000 less than what Sydney is, despite very little in the difference in household incomes. Canberra, on the other hand, it's very different. We're seeing Canberra is a marketplace where it's largely fueled by the public sector. In the public sector, we're seeing stronger wages growth. Household income growth has been a bit stronger. And if you look at wages growth by state or by territory, Canberra really stands out, or the ACT really stands out as being the strongest area for higher incomes. So I think affordability constraints don't really hit the radar too much in Canberra. And coming on the back of a bit of a lull, you remember the 2010 election, a lot of discussion around job shedding and so forth in the ACT. That never really eventuated, but it did affect confidence. That's well and truly bounced back now, and we see that marketplace is performing quite strongly across both houses and units, but a bit stronger in the detached housing sector.
Tim, Charles was saying before that he sees the slowdown as a positive. It's good news. Do you agree?
Absolutely. You couldn't expect to see Sydney continuing with value growth up around 15 to 20% per annum at a time when wages are only rising by around 2 to 3% per annum. Yields are tracking now below 3% gross, so about 2.8% across the Sydney market. So we are seeing a lot of affordability constraints hit this market, and we're still seeing investors quite concentrated across the Sydney market. On the ABS housing finance data, nearly 60% of all housing finance commitments in New South Wales were for investment purposes. So as we start to see tightening of lending to investment and premiums on investment loans and interest-only loans, it makes sense that Sydney is going to be affected more so than other markets where investors aren't quite as heavily concentrated as what they are across the Sydney market.
Tim, you and I are going to be chatting for 30 minutes on Sky Business week after next, so there's plenty to talk about there, but I'm going to put you on the spot with one quick question. I know you know the answer to this. Give me your views on whether or not you think the apartment market in Brisbane particularly is going to struggle due to the various changes in borrowing from overseas and also the oversupply.
Well, there's a few reasons why it is going to struggle. It is already struggling. You can see it really clearly. If you look at our headline figures for Brisbane overall, you can see house values are up about 4% the last 12 months, and unit values are down by 3%. And this largely relates back to the inner city apartment market, where we are seeing some supply concerns are very much confined to specific precincts. So it's Fortitude Valley, South Brisbane, West End, to a lesser extent the CBD, but also particular product types. So it's largely the investment style high-rise product that's undifferentiated from the other product in the marketplace where we are seeing the most distress. So we track a lot of indicators in the apartment markets. We look at, for example, what proportion of resales are loss-making. Across the Brisbane inner city apartment market, about 25% of apartment resales were sold for less than what they were purchased for over the March quarter. It'll probably be a little bit worse than that over the June quarter.
Tim Lawless is here from CoreLogic. Mate, just finally, we're about to head into the spring selling time. How's that going to impact? Are we going to see a whole lot more stock come on to the market, or will people hang back given that prices are doing the same?
I think we're already seeing stock ramping up even before spring. So I think we will see more stock hit the marketplace during spring. That's normal. It's seasonal. We generally do tend to see more listings hit the marketplace during spring because it's a better time to sell. It's when the weather is better, it's warmer, you don't get as much rain and so forth. So and the flowers are out, all that sort of stuff. But I think for buyers, it's a great opportunity because you'll find there's more stock out there. And this is one of the things that's really pushed up prices in Sydney and in Melbourne, is that stock levels have been just so low that a lot of buyers have this sense of urgency. If they don't buy into the market straight away, they feel like the property will be sold out from under them. That's now changing a little bit. We're seeing listing numbers across Sydney are about 16% higher than what they were a year ago. And I think during spring, they'll probably get a little bit higher than that once again. So good opportunity for buyers. Don't have as much urgency. You can negotiate a little bit more, and you probably have a little bit more time to make a decision.
Good on you, Tim. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Property Fast Track tonight. Charles Tarbey's here taking your calls on 13 12 83. And remember, if you get yourself on the radio tonight, any time over this next month, the month of spring is good for selling houses, also good for winning $10,000. Have your say to win 10K on 13 12 83. Charles Tarbey's here tonight. 13 12 83's the number as we go around the grounds and get a snapshot of a particular region. And tonight it's Paul Karasalidis from Century 21 at Wolli Creek in New South Wales.
Yes, and Paul operates in a fantastic area, an area that you would never have even thought would be a great real estate area, just slightly south of Tempe Tip. And it's become Wolli Creek.
Yeah.
And Wolli Creek is right near the airport, but you don't generally hear the planes because they're flying over Newtown or some other area. And the apartment complexes and also the social activities, the restaurants, everything's popped up. It's become a real fantastic lifestyle area.
As long as a crane doesn't fall through your penthouse apartment like it did a couple of weeks
ago. I was going to forget
Sorry,
about that.
Paul.
I love the sense of realism you bring to the show, Kayley.
Hello, Paul.
Good evening.
Yeah, did you see what they're doing, Paul? They're already
Sorry about that.
Look, you know.
Yeah, we got the crane joke out the way, Paul. Is that all right?
Well, I was selling the opposite penthouse, but now I can't even sell that for at least another year.
Oh, really? Going to wait till the dust settles, literally.
Paul, tell us why. What's happening? There's so many apartments going up there. You've got a lot of interest in the area. What do you think it is?
Look, Charles, I just think Wolli Creek, no one really knows Wolli Creek at all because it's just one of those suburbs that miss it if you really drive past it so quick. And it's only got about 10 streets in the whole suburb, but the infrastructure is just really, really picked up in the last, I'll say, the last 10 years. It's a hub now where people want to come. The infrastructure's there. There's parks, there's golf courses, there's restaurants that are opening up. There's all boutique little shops. But it's just a return on investment, really, why people are coming to Wolli Creek at the moment.
And a top-notch rail service.
Absolutely. You can actually go down to Wollongong, you can go west to Katoomba, you can go east to Bondi, and you can go north to Gosford.
Wow.
Wolli Creek.
Gee, that's good, isn't it?
Is it all apartments, Paul, or are there some houses in those 10 streets?
No, Wolli Creek is, I'll say, about 90% of apartments. There's only 4 or 5 streets that have still got housing, but they've all been rezoned now. And the residents there, they're really struck gold because many years ago, people didn't want to live next to the airport or next to an industrial area, but those houses that were worth $800,000, now they're getting close to $2 million.
And what about an apartment? Let's say I want to buy a two-bedder. What would I need to pay?
Oh, look, anything without a view, you're probably looking around the $750 mark. Anything with a view of the Cooks River or even the Botany Bay view, you're looking up to $850.
Right.
But anything with a city view, you're probably looking over $1 million.
Wow.
Gee whiz, it's going crazy, isn't it? I remember going out on the train to the airport and you go past it and see there's a little sign there, Wolli Creek, and you think, oh, gee, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, where's Wolli Creek?
Yeah, well, you do. You drive down
North Arncliffe at one stage, but the residents petitioned and they all got together and they named it Wolli Creek.
Yeah, you drive past on Pacific Highway, yes? Is that right, Paul?
Princess
Highway,
Princess,
sorry.
yeah.
Drive past the Princess Highway and you do. If you don't turn left or right, the traffic lights, you miss it. You go right past it.
Which is probably a good thing.
Absolutely.
Good if you're a local.
It is. Paul, like I was saying earlier, Tempe Tip is just north of that. From memory, as a kid, I spent a lot of time in Earlwood. And it's not an area you would have thought that they would develop, but it's got some stunning apartments all the way through it.
Oh, look, Charles, we about 2 weeks ago, we've actually held the record for Wolli Creek. We actually sold a 3-bedroom, 12-year-old apartment for $1.250.
Wow.
Gee.
And that's something that the owner didn't expect, and even the local residents never thought that you'll be getting $1,250,000. But yeah, it's just what's happening at the moment. It's just everyone really wants to be at Wolli Creek because of the proximity of the city and even the airport. You see a lot of people with luggages rolling all the way to the railway station and just 2 stops in the airport.
It reminds me of the movie The Castle.
That's it.
Living next door to the airport, you can walk all the way with your luggage.
That's beautiful. You can smell the serenity too. Tim, thanks very much. So not Tim, Paul, thank you so much for your time. And just quickly to wrap it, because Tim Lawless said possibly, reminded us that maybe prices may be dropping a bit in Sydney. Do you forecast a similar thing happening for Wolli Creek in the next 12 months?
I absolutely say no to that because what I was selling 6 months ago, it's gone up at least 50,000.
Yeah, okay. That's a great area.
It's just the demand.
It was an untapped area, Paul. It's just an untapped area that people are now discovering, and I think that's why you're going to get that gain.
Good on you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much. Next up is Josh Brockhurst from Century 21 Thornlie, just south of Perth, not the Sydney Thornlie. Josh joins us again. Hi, Josh.
G'day, how you doing?
G'day, Josh. We spoke to you a little while back and the marketplace in Perth, everybody's talking doom and gloom and for some reason, I know what it is, I know what your work ethic is like and your team are like, but your marketplace is moving along very strongly and bucking the trend. What do you think that's all about?
Look, it's probably due to the fact that the prices here have probably come to their lowest they've been for quite a while. People are saying they're back to 2007 prices, sort of 10 years ago, 2010 prices. So, we've had a real mixture of investors starting to come back in the market. So they went quiet for probably 3 years, and they're starting to come back in. Look, the train line's still there. We've still got good schools. We've still got, good shopping centres and a real broad mix of entry level from about $270,000 for a 2-bedroom unit right up to about $650 for a decent 4x2. So it's really a broad cross-section. And look, with our clients, we really educate them on what's going on as quick as we can, and we don't sell them false promises. So our average time on market is about 60 days, whereas in the area that I operate, the average time on market is about 90 days. So it's just really, giving it to people straight.
That's interesting. Now, we've got a young man sitting opposite me that's still, I don't think he's bought anything yet. No, he still hasn't. See those prices there, John? They're very realistic prices. And, and again, if you're hitting the bottom of the market, we're back to 2007 prices. Well, we said before, we think that Perth is an area to really watch very,
But
very
it'll
closely.
come back, won't it?
Yes.
It's just a matter of time. It will come back.
It is a matter of time. I think that it's going to become one of the most affordable cities, whereas if you go back just a few years ago, the median price was almost as high as Sydney's at one stage.
Do you reckon it's kind of at a point now where it's gone as low as it can be? Because people love to watch the cycles and buy when it's real low and get out when it's real high. What do you think about that, Josh?
I would think that we'd have to be pretty close. I mean, the last 3 or 4 weeks, buyer numbers have started to pick up. We're getting multiple offers again on properties. So things look like they're just starting to, move a cog and the gears are starting to turn. I mean, the median house price here is now $380, but it would have been well over $450 at the peak. So, that it came back 20%, and it looks like we're going to start to kick now. And investors, first home buyers, families. I mean, it's a good area for that, and we're less than 20 k's from the city, so it's a pretty good interest there.
Where else can you live less than 20 k's from the city for under 400k?
Josh, are you seeing people from the eastern states, investors buying?
Look, we're probably just starting to see that. And some of the Chinese buyers and what have you, I think they've seen the prices have gone crazy over there, so they're starting to have a bit of a sniff around here now, and it's just so much more affordable. So we're starting to see them drift in, and it's investors have been noticeably absent for quite a while, and the rents had come down 20%, and that's the time to buy your investment property when the rents are down, the market's down, and it's only got one way to go.
Good
Are
advice.
we seeing fire sales, mate? People, must be some folks who are really hurting when you say that the average price of a home was about $450 a year or two back, and now it's maybe $380. And there must be some people really doing it tough, are they?
Look, I'm not seeing a whole heap of people that have to sell. I mean, obviously there's, the banks have foreclosed on a few, not so much in the area that I am, but I've heard that there's been a few over the last few years. But I mean, our clients, our advice is if they can hold on, because it's only going to head one way up. So I'm not telling them, jump on the market and sell now if they don't need to. But if they need to, we'll show them the system and strategies that they need to adhere to get the best result in any market.
All right, there's Josh Brockhurst in
advice.
Perth,
Thank you, Josh.
just out Perth, in Thornlie, which is 20 k's out of the CBD. Thanks for your time. He's got a Century 21 agency there. Charles Tarbey's here tonight, 13 12 83, taking your calls for all things real estate. And hey, have your say to win 10k. That's that easy. 13 12 83. Give us a call. Get on the radio and be in that draw.
And coming up after the break, we'll talk to Matt Shalhoub under the hammer and with an auction wrap on Property Fast Track.
Oh, don't you love it when spring sprungs?
Spring sprung. The first
Yeah, I
auction
love it.
weekend of the spring has tossed up plenty for us to talk about, so let's catch up with Matt Shalhoub. He's an auctioneer and runs his own company called Under the Hammer. Joins us again on Property Fast Track. G'day, Matt.
Good evening, guys. How are you?
Well, thank you, mate. So in Sydney, Matt, some are calling it the worst start to spring since 2012. Is that true or just a clever headline?
No, it's definitely been it's probably been a tougher last couple of weeks without a doubt in terms of clearance rates particularly, and participation rates being a bit lower. So I'd say that's pretty fair to say if you're talking clearance rates, absolutely.
And what's the buyer sentiment out like there? What do you think? What are you seeing in the suburbs?
Look, if I had to sum it in one word, I'd probably say apprehensive. I think we're still seeing some properties get some decent results, but I think there's just a lot of uncertainty as to where they want to position themselves.
Matt, it's interesting. When I look at the stats right across the country, every capital city, except for Perth, has had a weaker time this last weekend than they had exactly, because the dates are exactly the same as this time last year. And so the clearance rates last year were certainly higher, in some cases 10% higher than they were this last weekend. So it certainly is challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think last year we were looking around the mid-70s roughly for the same weekend. And I was looking at our stats, and we actually ran a similar number of auctions in the two weekends in comparison between 16 and 17. The clearance rates, I think in Sydney were just under 10% less, and Melbourne, not too much different.
Even Adelaide was almost 20 points higher this time last year.
Wow.
Yeah, there's definitely some movement out there at the moment.
Now, wealthy buyers continue to be strongly represented. Prestige sales are strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I take my attention back to a property recently in Darling Point where we had some quite active bidding. In my opinion, though, I think that one of the things that are getting overlooked is in these clearance rates is vendor expectations. And, that plays a big part in clearance rates at the moment as well.
Are they realistic, those expectations?
Well, look, sometimes I'd say probably a little bit ambitious. I think that vendors need to, like everyone else, need to adjust with the market sometimes because we're seeing properties where buyers are participating, maybe not the same amount of buyers, but they are participating and they're bidding to what is deemed to be a fair level. But if the vendors want a little bit more and they're going to be adamant about that, well, then that's definitely going to have an impact on the sale and the clearance rate.
Matt, are you getting solid and clear outcomes or stock being passed in and then being negotiated for sale later?
Look, there's definitely a large number of the properties that are getting passed in and sold probably within 7 days. I think it would be a fair assessment, I should say, as to those after auction sales. And a lot of that comes down to those, last minute, I suppose that last push from the vendors to try and squeeze a little bit more. But the ones that are passed in are generally passed in because there just isn't that intensity that there was there a couple of months ago. So buyers don't have the urgency to push forward that extra 5%.
Matt, it's interesting to watch how the industry is going to change through all of this. Now, you train a lot of auctioneers. You have auctioneers working with you and for you. Do you see the auction, obviously there's going to be a greater skill needed nowadays. Do you see auctioneers that came in the last 3 to 5 years falling away?
Well, I see them definitely struggling because I think that in the last couple of years, auctioneers and agents to a degree have been a little bit spoilt in the fact that they've just had to go out there and just catch the bids. If I could be so brazen in saying, I think now with the experienced auctioneers will definitely excel because it's not just about calling a number; it's about implementing strategies to work with the agents and to assist them in getting their ultimate goal, which is a sale.
What about, Brisbane's been steady, but apparently there's a more interesting story further north.
Yeah, look, Brisbane's one of those funny cities that, the volume is not necessarily high compared to, say, particularly Sydney and Melbourne. However, we find that the biggest move on the north side is the Sunshine Coast in terms of an auction market. Their numbers are growing from strength to strength almost every quarter.
That's another area we picked very strongly. We talk about that area. And there are some great buys still on the Sunshine Coast because it is just fantastic lifestyle, airport, etc.,
brand new
universities,
hospital,
a whole lot. Yeah. Beautiful beaches. What more?
Absolutely,
what more you need?
And you're also seeing a migration of buyers from, particularly from Sydney, who are looking to whether they are occupying or investing, just by trying to find better value.
It's interesting, isn't it? So, well, hopefully things will pick up for you a bit in October.
Yeah, well, the bookings are definitely coming in for the spring campaign. September's shown quite a lot of bookings in comparison to August, and October's already filling up. So let's hope that the buyer activity sort of wakes us up a little bit and we can get some great results.
Cheers, Matt. Matt Shalhoub, auctioneer for Under the Hammer. Thanks for your time tonight.
Guys. Have a great night.
Yeah,
Thank
you too, matey. And it's Charles Tarbey getting set to go out and get some hair and makeup done. Not that you really need it, mate, for Sky Business tonight.
Yeah.
Hey, quick one before you go. I've got 40 seconds to cover this. Your opinion. Are suburbs gentrified only when younger folks move in? What have you seen over the years?
Yeah, you generally see the suburbs sitting there for years with the same people living in them with nothing happening. And then people discover the suburbs, like we talk about Wolli Creek being the suburb in between suburbs that nobody hears about. And then people start to do some work. And I notice around Glenbrook, where I live lately, my son and I have been chatting about how many homes are being refurbished, how many houses are being knocked down and being rebuilt. So, yes, I think that's what it is.
And
new
hipster
people
bars
coming
and
in.
coffee shops and all that stuff.
There you go.
Yes, I can't wait.
So the younger buyers move in and they say they're being gentrified. You could argue that they're, being hooliganised.
Hipster style.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Charles. Have a great night tonight on Sky Business, and we'll talk to you next week. Kayley,
See you tomorrow.
Bye.